in class, my hand halfway raised. The words form in my head, but before they can even reach my mouth, I pull them back. What if I say the wrong thing? What if my accent stands out? So, I stay silent. This isn't my story, but it's the reality for countless students who remain silent in classrooms every day. Examining why students stay silent allows us to understand how social, cultural, and emotional factors impact participation in learning environments. As a student myself and a former student aide, I've witnessed this silence firsthand and have seen the lasting effects it can have in the classroom. Students often stay silent due to cultural norms, language barriers, or differing views of authority that shape how they express themselves. Today, I will be discussing how students use silence as a form of identity. Then, I will look at how students use silence to communicate meaning in both subtle and powerful ways. Finally, I'll be examining how students use silence as a form of power, influencing their relationships and experiences. To begin, silence doesn't have to mean withholding identity. It can also mean expressing it. To illustrate, in 2024, Viana Lay reported that in multilingual classrooms, students use silence as a way to manage how they view themselves and how they think others see them. Additionally, Joe and colleagues did a study in 2005 where Chinese students shared how even after they participated in class, it seemed like their classmates misunderstood their ideas. So, remaining silent became the only way to preserve their sense of perspective and belonging in the classroom. Helen Moran's research in 2016 echoes this. Anya, a New Zealand middle school student, shared how over-talking and shouting felt disrespectful. Anya's comment reminds us that for many students, silence is respect, culture, and strength. In some homes, children are taught, wait your turn, listen first, and don't interrupt. When these same students enter classrooms where the loudest answer earns the most praise, they don't fail to participate. They participate in their own language, the language of quiet. And let's be honest, some days the language of quiet is the only language any of us ever want to speak. So when a student is staying silent, they are revealing who they are in the only way the room has left them. Now that we've seen how silence can reflect identity, now let's explore how it can communicate meaning beyond just spoken words. To demonstrate, in 1996, Kenneth Burke, a famous communication scholar, said language is symbolic action, reminding us that meaning exists even without spoken words. Something every educator knows, because sometimes the quiet stare a student gives you communicates a lot. Similarly, Bruno in 1973 and Jarowski in 1993, both communication scholars, describe silence as a powerful form of nonverbal communication. For instance, a pause may carry respect, a long silence may carry fear, and a quiet moment can reveal more truth than a full paragraph of words. Empirical studies support this interpretation. Peng and colleagues did a study in 2023 in Shanghai with over 1,000 college students. They found that teachers frequently misinterpreted silent students as being disengaged. In reality, those students were actively processing information internally. In classrooms, these moments of silence often serve as that emotional punctuation, adding meaning and context that verbal contributions alone cannot. For instance, the pause after a difficult question may signal contemplation or hesitation rather than confusion. Think of silence like an accent. Instead of shaping the word from how it sounds, it shapes the word through its presence or absence. Understanding this silent accent is essential for interpreting a student's participation accurately. And sometimes silence doesn't simply communicate, it protests. Which brings me to my final point. In 19 1878, Michel Foucault said, "Where there is power, there is resistance." In the classroom, silence becomes this resistance, a quiet rebellion with loud consequences. Students may choose silence not out of fear, but out of refusal. Refusal to perform, to hurry, to sound a certain way, to fit their identity into someone else's mold. In this sense, silence is a protective boundary that cannot be externally regulated or graded, making it a subtle but effective form of student autonomy. And here's the paradox. The quieter the resistance, the harder it becomes to ignore. Silence forces us to lean in, to question, and to reflect. Sometimes, silence is not the absence of power, but power choosing a quieter weapon. Now, let's wrap up and reflect on how we can use this knowledge. Like I said earlier, students often use silence due to cultural norms, language barriers, or differing views of authority that shape how they express themselves. Today, I discussed how students use silence as a form of identity. Then I conveyed how students use silence to communicate meaning in both subtle and powerful ways. Finally, I examined how students use silence as a form of power, influencing their relationships and experiences. Remember the student who kept their hand down, afraid to speak? That story isn't uncommon. It represents the experience of many students. Understanding the multiple functions of silence allows us to respond more thoughtfully to the quiet students and ensure their voices, spoken or unspoken, are truly being heard. Thank you.